chosen one, before these words ever found you, a decision had already been made about your life. It wasn't made by the people around you, by circumstances, or by anyone who believed they had the power to shape your future. It was made by the one who has seen every chapter of your story from the very beginning, long before you ever reached this moment. At first you may believe that decision brought you loss, disappointment, or another unanswered prayer. But stay with me for a little longer before you decide what it truly means. Some truths can only be understood after the heart has been willing to sit with the questions for a while. Maybe you've been replaying certain moments over and over, trying to understand where everything changed. The email that never came, the phone call that ended in silence, the opportunity that felt so close you could almost touch it, only to disappear without a reason anyone could explain. Perhaps you've even caught yourself wondering whether one different decision could have changed everything. Some disappointments make noise, but the deepest ones often arrive quietly, leaving you alone with questions no one else can answer and memories that return when the room grows still. You've carried those questions longer than most people realize. There were mornings when you smiled because you had to, even though your heart was still standing in front of a closed door. There were evenings when everyone around you assumed you were moving on, while inside you were still quietly searching for meaning. There were prayers you stopped talking about because explaining your hope became more exhausting than carrying it in silence. Somewhere along the way, you learned that some burdens are easier to hide than to explain. If that feels familiar, then perhaps your spirit recognized something before your mind could explain it. What I'm about to share has the power to change the way you remember every door that closed in the past several months. It may even change the way you tell your own story. Those endings were never meant to become evidence that you were forgotten or overlooked. They were preparing you to see your life from a completely different place, one that only becomes visible after enough time has passed for perspective to grow. Before this message is over, I'll share a Hebrew word that may forever change the way you think about waiting, not as empty time, but as the quiet place where something inside you has been taking shape long before anything changed around you. If something in you already feels that this message was meant to reach you, type the words "He cancelled for me" in the comments. Not because every answer has become clear, but because somewhere beneath the confusion, a quieter part of your heart is beginning to recognize a deeper truth. Sometimes your spirit recognizes peace before your thoughts know how to explain it. Sometimes healing begins the moment your heart realizes it has been seen. Now let me speak with the reverence this moment deserves. My child, I have seen every tear you never explained, every night you wondered whether heaven had grown silent, and every time you watched someone else receive the very thing you had been praying for. I saw the moments when you quietly celebrated for others while wondering if your own season would ever come. The hardest part wasn't watching others move ahead. It was the quiet question that settled inside you when no one else could hear it. Did you remember everyone except me? You never asked it with anger. You asked it with a tired heart that simply wanted to understand. Hear this carefully. You have never been outside my care, not for a single moment. Even during the days when my silence felt heavy, my hands never stopped working on your behalf. What felt like rejection was leading you in another direction, because what you were reaching for could never carry the fullness of what I was preparing to place into your hands. You asked me for enough to get through another season, but I was shaping something meant to endure far beyond this one. You asked for a single open door, while I was preparing ground wide enough for what your life would eventually hold. Sometimes the answer to your prayer was not a quicker arrival, but a larger preparation. There is a difference between receiving enough to stay comfortable and receiving what is needed to walk faithfully into your calling. Comfort supports the life you already know because it asks very little of you beyond what feels familiar. Calling invites you into a life that stretches your faith, expands your capacity, and asks you to become someone stronger than the person who first prayed the prayer. That difference changes the meaning of every disappointment you've been carrying, because what once looked like delay begins to reveal itself as preparation. For so long you looked at every opportunity that slipped away and believed you had somehow missed your moment. You questioned your faith, your timing, even your own worth. You wondered if perhaps you had overlooked a sign or made a mistake that quietly changed the course of your future. Yet there was another reality unfolding beneath everything you could see. There are moments when something is genuinely good yet still too small for the life I have written over my chosen one, and love refuses to let you settle inside a future that would eventually limit who you were created to become. What you called loss, I often saw as protection from a future that would have asked you to shrink. Think about that opportunity you almost had a few years ago. You prepared for it, imagined your future inside it, and then watched it disappear just before it became yours. You replayed every conversation, every interview, every detail, wondering if you could have changed the outcome by saying one thing differently. You carried the disappointment home, wondering what you had done wrong. But had that door remained open, it might have anchored you to a place that could never have held what was still ahead, exchanging lasting purpose for temporary security. Sometimes the opportunities that leave the deepest ache are also the ones that quietly protect your greater future. Now remember the relationship that quietly slipped away. There was no dramatic ending, no obvious person to blame, only a silence that lingered long after the conversations stopped. You carried that ache with you, because for the first time in a long while, you felt truly seen. And losing that connection felt like losing part of the future you had already begun imagining. There are some goodbyes that leave no visible scars, yet they echo through the heart for months afterward. Yet there are seasons when even something beautiful must end, because the next chapter asks for a heart that is free to receive what it could never have embraced while carrying yesterday's weight. Some endings make room not because they lacked love, but because they could not accompany you where you were being led. The cancellation was never the conclusion of your story. It was the space where the next chapter could finally begin. You've been standing in that open space for so long that it started to feel like abandonment, and empty places often tempt the heart to believe that nothing is growing there. But look again, a field after harvest always appears empty before new life pushes through the soil. The quietness of the field does not mean the work has stopped. It simply means the deepest work is happening where the eye cannot yet see it. I cleared what stood there before, because the ground needed room for what was always meant to grow, and every door that closed made space for something your life was not yet ready to hold. One day you will look back at what felt like an empty season and realize it was never empty at all. It was the place where everything essential was taking root beneath the surface. Chosen one, there is another part of your story that deserves to be seen, because every door that closed changed far more than your circumstances. Something quietly formed inside you while you were trying to make sense of the waiting. And before we go any further, I want to gently bring that hidden place into the light. It wasn't something I ever desired for you, yet it slowly took shape in the silence that followed every unanswered question. Sometimes the deepest changes happen so quietly that you don't realize they become part of the way you move through the world until much later. Each time a job slipped away, a relationship ended, or an opportunity disappeared, just when it felt close enough to hold, your body remembered the disappointment, even when your mind tried to move forward. Maybe you told yourself you had accepted what happened, yet something inside you remained alert, watching for the next loss before the next blessing had even arrived. Your shoulders carried a little more weight, your breathing became a little shallower, and before long, you found yourself expecting the next good thing to disappear before it ever had the chance to stay. Even small moments of hope began carrying a quiet question: how long before this is taken away too? Over time, that expectation settled deeper than your thoughts. It became the quiet voice that whispered, maybe this is just how life goes for me. You stopped celebrating too early, because experience had taught you to brace yourself. You learned to soften your own excitement before anything beautiful could be taken away again, believing that protecting your heart would somehow make the next loss hurt less. Without realizing it, caution slowly replaced anticipation, and surviving began to feel safer than hoping. I want to give that hidden wound a name, because what can be named can finally be understood, and what is understood no longer has to remain hidden in the shadows. It is a pattern shaped by repeated disappointment, one that teaches your heart to expect absence, even while your soul still longs to believe. It is not your identity, and it never became part of you, because your faith was too small, or because you somehow failed. It formed because your heart was trying to protect something precious, while walking through a season that demanded more endurance than you ever imagined. What I intended as protection, you slowly began to experience as rejection. Every closed door carried my care, yet your heart interpreted those moments through the pain they left behind, because pain often speaks louder than purpose while we are living through it. There was a gap between what I was doing for you and what your wounded heart believed was happening, and that gap became the place where fear quietly settled. It wasn't that you stopped trusting completely, you simply stopped expecting good things to stay. But hear me now, because this is where your story begins to change. That fear never defined who you are. It was a response to what you lived through, not a description of the person I created you to be. You are not someone life continually overlooks. You are someone whose path has been carefully rearranged, even when the journey made no sense in the moment. The story your pain told you has never been the story I have been writing over your life. Today, as these words reach you, I am inviting you to loosen your grip on that old expectation. You do not have to force healing into existence, nor do you have to convince yourself that everything suddenly makes sense. Truth has a way of gently undoing the conclusions that pain once convinced you to believe. Every closed door carried more love than you could see at the time, and little by little your heart can begin to trust that again. Healing often begins quietly, long before you recognize that it has already started. If something inside you just recognized that difference, if it feels as though a weight shifted somewhere deep within your chest, type the words, "I am rearranged for," in the comments. Sometimes giving language to what is happening inside you becomes the first step toward leaving an old pattern behind. A simple declaration cannot erase the past, but it can remind your heart that it no longer has to live inside yesterday's conclusions. Now imagine a morning several months from today. You wake before the alarm, not because anxiety pulled you out of sleep, but because peace arrived before the day did. You lie there quietly, noticing something almost unfamiliar. The heaviness that used to greet you every morning has lifted, and in its place is a quiet confidence that doesn't need to prove itself. It simply knows that goodness is no longer something to fear. For the first time in a long while, you are not scanning the day for what might go wrong. You are simply present inside it. As you rest there, an old memory drifts back into your mind. You remember another morning years ago when you stared at the ceiling, wondering if God still remembered your name. You remember how long those few quiet minutes felt before you finally got out of bed and carried your questions into another ordinary day. This time you don't revisit that memory with sadness. You meet it with compassion because you can finally see what that long silence was, quietly building inside you. Instead of judging the person you were then, you feel gratitude for the strength that was being formed without your awareness. The person you become in that moment is not someone imaginary. That version of you has been taking shape through every season you thought was standing still, every difficult conversation, every prayer that seemed to echo back in silence. Every morning you kept moving forward without seeing immediate change was shaping someone stronger than you realized. The distance between where you are today and where you are going is measured by more than time. It is measured by the healing of a heart that is learning, little by little, to stop expecting loss and begin making room for hope again. I know there is a part of you that wants to believe every word you are hearing, yet still hesitates. You've heard hopeful messages before. You've held promises close before, only to watch life unfold differently than you expected. After enough disappointment, even hope can begin to feel dangerous because opening your heart seems to invite more pain. Sometimes protecting yourself begins to feel wiser than believing again, even though another part of you still quietly longs to trust. But surviving and truly living are not the same thing. Surviving teaches you how to endure another day. but living allows your heart to become fully present inside the life you have been given. I am calling you into something deeper than endurance. I am inviting you into a life where your heart no longer has to remain guarded just to feel safe, where you can receive what I have prepared without constantly waiting for it to disappear. Peace grows differently inside a heart that no longer expects every blessing to be temporary. There is another layer to this healing that I want you to understand. After carrying disappointment for so long, your heart slowly learned to protect itself by keeping a certain distance. You could hear words of hope. You could understand them with your mind. You could even agree that they were true, yet somehow they never reached the deepest places inside you where they were meant to settle. It was as though your heart quietly whispered, "I believe this is possible for someone. I'm just not sure it's possible for me." Perhaps you've experienced that more times than you can count. You prayed, but your heart felt closed. You read words that once brought life, yet they seemed unable to reach the place where you needed them most. You watched others move to tears, while you quietly wondered why your own heart felt so still. And you carried that question in silence because you didn't know how to explain it. You weren't pretending. You genuinely wanted to receive. You simply didn't understand why receiving had begun to feel so difficult. Please hear this with gentleness. This has never been proof that you were forgotten or somehow incapable of receiving my presence. Sometimes a heart that has endured long seasons of disappointment simply learns to guard itself so well that even hope struggles to find its way inside. Those walls were never built because you stopped loving me. They were built because you had been carrying more pain than you knew how to name. Yet what has been guarded can also be opened, and what has grown quiet can awaken again. The heart that learned to survive can also learn to rest. So before we go any further, I want you to hold one question in your heart. What is the reason everything has felt distant? Isn't because I stopped speaking, but because your weary heart has spent so long protecting itself that it has forgotten how to rest. Sit with that question for a little while longer without rushing to answer it. Let it settle into the quiet places inside you. Because sometimes the right question opens a door that years of striving never could. Everything we are about to uncover together will help you understand why the season ahead will feel unlike anything you have experienced before, and why the heart that has been learning to trust again is finally ready to receive what has been waiting for it all along. My child, the season ahead will carry a different rhythm from the one you've been living through. It won't simply bring more activity. It will bring movement that has been quietly prepared over time, long before you ever recognized the signs of it. There are moments when years of unseen growth suddenly become visible all at once, and what once felt painfully slow begins unfolding with a peace that doesn't need to rush, because it knows its time has come. You may even find yourself wondering how so much could change so naturally, only to realize that heaven had been arranging what your eyes could not yet see. The first thing you will notice is that what seemed delayed begins moving with unexpected clarity. Doors that never responded before will begin opening with a simplicity that surprises you, not because heaven suddenly remembered you, but because everything has been quietly finding its proper place. Conversations that once led nowhere may suddenly carry direction. Opportunities may arrive without the struggle you have grown used to, and what took years to prepare may unfold in ways that leave you looking back, realizing nothing was ever standing still. The waiting did not slow your story, it quietly aligned it. The second gift is one many people never expect. It isn't recognition from the world. It is recognition within yourself. You will begin meeting the version of you that has been waiting beneath fear, disappointment, and survival. The quiet confidence you carried as a child, the part of you that trusted before life taught you to doubt, will slowly begin to feel familiar again, not as a memory, but as the way you now live. You will notice yourself responding differently to situations that once overwhelmed you, and without forcing anything, you will realize that healing has already begun changing the way you move through the world. The third gift is provision, but perhaps not in the way you once imagined it. For so long you believed provision meant rescue, a way out of your circumstances. Yet what I have been preparing reaches much deeper than that. I am leading you into a life where what you have been given and what you have been called to carry begin moving together, where each step of obedience uncovers exactly what is needed for the next one. The resources you need will meet you along the path of faithfulness, teaching you that true provision often arrives through purpose rather than comfort. That is why some things could never remain. They were enough to make life easier, but they were never spacious enough for the life I was inviting you into. Had they remained, they would have answered a temporary need while quietly limiting the person you were becoming. I was never preparing you simply to become comfortable. I was preparing you to grow into the fullness of what I placed within you, long before you ever understood it yourself. Because the life I designed for you requires room to expand beyond what once felt sufficient. If that truth has settled somewhere deep inside you, type the words "calling level" in the comments. Sometimes the heart embraces a new reality when it dares to give it a voice. What once looked like delay begins to make sense when you realize you were never waiting for permission to live you. You were being prepared to carry more than you could have imagined. Speaking those words can become a quiet reminder that your journey has always been leading towards something greater than immediate comfort. Now, if you are able, close your eyes for a moment. Take one slow breath and let it fill your lungs without rushing, allowing your body to settle into the stillness instead of trying to escape it. As you breathe out, allow yourself to become aware of the quiet place beneath your thoughts, because healing often begins there before it ever reaches your words. Sometimes the deepest shifts happen in moments so gentle that they almost pass unnoticed. Bring your attention gently to the center of your chest. Don't try to change what you feel or judge whatever rises to the surface. Simply notice it. There may be heaviness, tightness, warmth, or perhaps only a silence you've carried for so long that you almost stop noticing it. Whatever you find there, let it be seen without trying to push it away, because what is acknowledged often begins to loosen its hold. Imagine that heaviness as a tightly closed hand, not your hand, but one formed from every disappointment that convinced your heart it needed to stay guarded. Every unanswered prayer, every closed door, every moment that quietly whispered, "Don't hope too much this time," has been holding that hand closed. It has spent so long protecting you that it forgot how to rest, and perhaps you forgot it was even there. Now imagine that hand beginning to soften, not because you are forcing yourself to believe harder, but because truth has a way of gently loosening what fear kept clenched for years. The deeper truth has always been that what left your life was never beyond my care. Some things were released, so something greater could find room to arrive, and some endings quietly protected beginnings you could not yet recognize. Stay there for another breath. Feel the hand slowly opening, until your heart no longer feels like it has to protect itself from every possibility of joy. There is a quiet strength that grows inside a heart willing to receive again, and this openness is where hope begins to feel safe instead of dangerous. Healing rarely announces itself with dramatic moments. More often, it arrives as the simple realization that your heart no longer flinches at the thought of tomorrow. Perhaps even now a thought is rising within you. Maybe you're saying, "That sounds beautiful, but my story is different." I understand why you would feel that way, because your pain carries details no one else has lived, and some wounds feel impossible to explain to another person. Yet beneath every unique story is a familiar human experience. After enough disappointment, the heart quietly learns to brace itself before life even has the chance to unfold. It is not weakness. It is simply what wounded hearts learn to do when they have been protecting themselves for a very long time. That is why so many promises seemed unable to reach you. It wasn't because they lacked truth. It wasn't because your faith had disappeared. It was because part of your heart had grown tired from protecting itself for so long that hope no longer knew where to settle. You could hear words of hope, understand them completely, and still struggle to let them reach the deepest places inside you where they were needed most. You may remember sitting in prayer While your mind searched for words, your heart couldn't quite feel. You may remember reading promises that once filled you with life, wondering why they now seemed distant, even though you still believed them. You may even have watched others respond with tears, while you quietly questioned whether something inside you had gone silent, carrying that question home without ever speaking it aloud, because you didn't know how to explain what was missing. Please hear this with compassion. None of those moments were proof that you had been forgotten. They revealed how deeply your heart had learned to survive. A heart that has carried long seasons of disappointment often builds quiet walls without realizing it. Believing distance is the safest place to live. Those walls were never signs of failure. They were signs that your heart had been doing everything it knew to keep you moving through difficult seasons. But walls built for protection do not have to remain forever. What has been closed can slowly open again. What has grown weary can breathe again. The same heart that learned to guard itself can also learn, little by little, to trust what love has been patiently preparing all along. Healing is rarely about becoming someone new. More often it is the gentle return to the person you were before fear convinced you to hide. Everything we have uncovered together has been leading to this moment. You now see your waiting through different eyes. You understand that what looked like rejection was often protection, that silence was still carrying purpose, and that your guarded heart was never your true identity. That is where you have been, chosen one. But it is not where your story is meant to remain. Your past may explain how you arrived here, but it no longer has the authority to define where you are going. So stay with me a little longer, because there is still something I have not finished speaking over your life. The deepest part of this message is still ahead, and I want your heart to hear it with the openness it has been slowly rediscovering. Some truths can only be received after the heart has remembered how to listen again. And that is exactly where you are now. My child, it is time to share the word I promised you at the very beginning of this message. I waited until now because some truths cannot simply be explained. They have to be received by a heart that has been softened through the journey. Had I spoken this word too early, it would have sounded beautiful, but now it has the depth to become personal. The word is cover. Many people understand it simply as waiting, but its meaning reaches much deeper than that. It speaks of strands being woven together, one by one, until they become a rope strong enough to bear a weight that a single thread never could. Every strand matters, even the ones that seem fragile on their own, because strength is created through what has been joined together over time. That is the kind of waiting the prophets were describing. It was never the picture of someone sitting still, hoping the days would pass more quickly, or counting the hours until life finally changed. It was the quiet work of becoming someone stronger while nothing on the outside seemed to change. Every uncertain day, every unanswered prayer, every time you chose trust over bitterness, every moment you decided to rise one more morning, even when your heart felt heavy. Another strand was being woven into the person you were becoming. The transformation was never happening around you first. It was happening within you, where no one else could see. The waiting was never empty, even when it felt painfully ordinary. It was shaping you from the inside out, teaching your heart to carry a kind of strength that cannot be borrowed from comfort or convenience. While you thought nothing was happening, something within you was quietly becoming steady, patient, and resilient in ways that could never have been formed through easy seasons. What felt like silence was never distance. It was a sacred place where your life was being gathered together, strand by strand, into something far stronger than you could see. Even when you questioned whether anything was changing, heaven was still weaving together every part of your story with intentional care. One day you will look back at this season with different eyes. You will no longer remember it only for the tears, the disappointments, or the questions that kept you awake at night. You will recognize it as the place where your heart learned endurance, where your faith became quieter but infinitely deeper, and where your life was being prepared to carry what earlier versions of you could never have held. What once felt like a season of delay will become the chapter you thank God for, because without it, you would never have become the person capable of receiving what was waiting beyond it. If the word Kabar stirred something deep inside you, Type the word kava in the comments. Let it become your quiet declaration that the waiting was never wasted, that every unseen day was weaving strength into your soul long before you could recognize it. Sometimes a single word becomes a reminder you return to whenever life grows quiet again, reminding you that unseen work is still holy work. As this message begins to draw to a close, I want to leave you with something more than encouragement. Encouragement fades when circumstances change, but truth remains long after emotions rise and fall. I want to leave you with a declaration you can carry into the days ahead, one that will return to you when old fears try to speak louder than hope. Not because repeating beautiful words changes your life on its own, but because truth has a way of settling into places where fear once lived, until those places no longer belong to fear at all. May every closed door you have mourned find its proper meaning. May you come to see that what looked like loss was often protection, wearing unfamiliar clothing. May every disappointment that convinced you to doubt your value lose its voice as a deeper understanding quietly takes its place. And when old memories try to convince you that every ending was evidence against you, may wisdom gently remind you that some endings were acts of mercy you could only understand with time. May the part of you that learned to brace for disappointment finally discover what it feels like to rest. May your heart remember that it was never created to live in constant anticipation of loss. May it become safe again to receive goodness without immediately preparing for its departure. May every place inside you that has lived in quiet fear slowly remember what peace feels like, until hope becomes more familiar than anxiety and trust feels more natural than self-protection. May the noise that has surrounded your thoughts begin to settle like dust after a long storm. May your heart become more open to hope than to fear, and may your spirit become more attentive to quiet whispers than to loud doubts. May you recognize the gentle ways God has been leading you even through seasons that once appeared empty, and may you begin noticing that what seemed ordinary was often filled with unseen guidance all along. The season of standing still will not define your entire story. It is only one chapter, not the conclusion. What has been quietly prepared beneath the surface will begin revealing itself in its own perfect time, just as seeds hidden beneath the soil eventually rise into the light. When that day comes, you may find yourself looking back at the very disappointments that once broke your heart, whispering with gratitude, "Now I understand why that door could never stay open." The questions that once demanded answers will slowly become reminders of how faithfully you were carried through what you could not yet understand. You are not forgotten. You are not behind. You have never slipped beyond God's care, even during the days when you wondered if anyone saw your quiet faithfulness. Even in moments when nothing seemed to move, your life was still being positioned with purpose, and every unseen step has been carrying you toward the place where preparation and opportunity finally meet. The timeline has never been working against you. It has been working for the version of you that was still being formed. May every pattern of fear that has followed you begin losing its hold. May scarcity give way to trust, not because every circumstance changes overnight, but because your heart learns where true security has always been. May isolation give way to genuine connection. May exhaustion slowly surrender to renewed strength, and may the fog that has clouded your vision lift as hope quietly returns to your heart. May each new morning remind you that healing rarely arrives all at once, but it faithfully unfolds, one step, one breath, and one day at a time. What is being restored in you reaches beyond your own lifetime. The courage you reclaim today becomes part of the inheritance you leave behind. The healing you embrace changes more than your own story. It quietly changes the stories of those who will one day look to your life and find permission to believe again. Every cycle of fear that ends with you becomes a doorway to freedom for the generations that follow. Chosen one, this is who you have been all along. You were never the one abandoned or forgotten. You were the one whose path was cleared because your life was meant to be built on a foundation strong enough to carry what God had prepared for you. Even when you misunderstood the clearing as loss, heaven still understood its purpose. One day the evidence of that truth will become so unmistakable that the questions which once haunted you will finally grow quiet, replaced by a peace that no explanation could have produced. If these words settle deeply within your heart, type "I am the restored one" in the comments. Let those words become more than a response. Let them become a reminder of the person you are choosing to believe you are becoming. And if this message met you at the moment you needed it most, gently leave a like, so someone else walking through a season they don't yet understand has the chance to receive it too. Sometimes a single shared message becomes the encouragement another heart has been praying for in silence. And if this is your first time hearing a message like this, and something inside you felt recognized rather than persuaded, stay with this community of chosen ones who gather here not simply to consume messages, but to remember what hope sounds like when it speaks again. Sometimes healing begins the moment you realize you are no longer carrying your questions alone. The cancellation was never the ending of your story. It was the clearing before new life could take root, the quiet preparation before a greater unfolding. Trust the one who has been writing your story, even through the chapters that felt painfully silent. Trust his timing even when you cannot yet see the full picture. Trust the love that refused to leave you inside anything smaller than what you were created to carry. And when you eventually look back over this entire journey, may you discover that every chapter, even the ones you once wished away, was faithfully leading you toward the life that had been waiting for you all along. Amen.